Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Christian from the psychology department, here to welcome you. Good to see so many of you here with us today. We are privileged to present for you Dr. Kristina Smiley. Dr. Smiley has a PhD in psychology with a neuroscience focus from Cornell University, and she is an assistant professor at the University of Michigan. So let's give her a warm welcome. Thank you.
All right, so just checking that's on. Yep. All right, so thank you, Kate, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me here. This has been really fun to meet some of the students and see the campus. I grew up in Michigan, but I haven't been here in a very long time, so it was kind of nice to get reacquainted with Grand Rapids. So I'm going to talk about my research and sort of my research path from being a PhD student to an assistant professor. And I'm going to tell you right now that this talk is in birds. I know that's not always what you think about hearing in a psychology department, but I hope to show you that psychology is quite diverse and we can do lots of interesting psychological and neuroscience studies using these guys. But before I kind of get into the research part, the data part of the talk, I wanted to just give you a little bit of a backstory and why I'm so excited to come to Grand Rapids Community College today. So as I mentioned, I grew up in Michigan. I am a native Michigander from Troy, which is on the east side of the state. If you're familiar with that at all, I was Troy Athens High School. So born and raised in Michigan. And just like all of you sitting in the audience, I also started off at community college. So I went to Oakland Community College because I was in Oakland County. And I was mostly here at the Royal Oak campus. And yeah, just like you all, I had an interest in psychology. I didn't know what exactly about psychology I liked. I just knew that I liked psychology. And I knew the brain seemed really cool. And I thought it would be cool to study the brain one day. So I started off here. I didn't really, I don't know. I knew I liked psychology, but I didn't have quite the direction yet. So I did my gen eds here. I took some of the intro to psych, abnormal psych, those kind of classes. But I really discovered that I loved the subject. And after 2 years of OCC, I transferred to Wayne State in Detroit. And there I pursued a Bachelor's of Science degree in psychology, where I took more of the core psychology classes. And then I did a Bachelor's of Science instead of a Bachelor's of Arts so that I could get more of a science and biology background because I knew neuroscience was really interesting to me. So if you haven't been down to campus, this is Old Main. Wayne State really likes to show off their pretty building here. And it was actually in this building I had my first statistics class and discovered I loved statistics. That was strange. I was never really into math, but for some reason, statistical inferencing I found fun and exciting. And I was having a good time in the class, and I felt like I was doing well in the class. And I knew, coming from community college, I didn't know everything about what it meant to be at a four-year university, but I had heard bits and pieces. And one thing I heard about was you have to get letters of rec for scholarships and things that you want to apply for. So that statistics class that was here, one day I went up to my professor and I said, "Hey, professor, I've been really enjoying the class. I was wondering if you could write me a letter of rec." And he said, "Well, what for?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I just wanted a letter of rec, on hand in case I needed to apply for something in the future." And he was like, okay, you should come see me in my office. And I tell that story not to like completely embarrass myself, because I am, but I'm telling that story because I understand what it means to transfer to a university and not know what it means to be at a university. And so I was lucky that that professor was really open and met with me and sort of told me, you know, there's a lot of things that people learn during their first 2 years that you might not learn at community college because there aren't research programs there. It's just a different sort of setup. And so I met with this professor and he asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I want to study the brain. I think doing research on the brain would be really cool. So I'm going to do a PhD so I can do research. And he was like, well, you can also do research as an undergrad. And I was like, that blew my mind. I had never heard of that because, you know, there's not usually research going on at community colleges. And so he's like, no, I mean, if you want to go to grad school, you actually should be in a lab. Not only can you, but you should be. And I was, you know, my mind was blown. And so I reached out to a couple of professors in psychology and started working in my first research lab. And it was a toxicology lab, and so it was studying the effects of these inhalant drugs on motor behavior in rats and mice. And it was fun. I was an undergrad. I got rats high every day and watched their behavior. And I was like, this is kind of fun. This is cool. I could do this. But I didn't really love rats and mice. I just didn't really like holding them. I liked watching them, but I was like, I don't know if I could like work with these guys every day. And I've told this story a few times already today, but one day I was coming into the lab. It was the summer. I was coming in the morning, walking up to the biology building, and I couldn't go inside. And they said, well, there was a fire that happened in the lab that I was working in. And I was like, well, oh no, I just learned I was supposed to do research, and I had only been in this lab for a summer. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do now? So I went back to that stats professor and told him what was going on. And he said, well, you know, there's this new faculty who just joined. Her name was Michelle. And she's starting her lab, and she was looking for undergraduate research assistants. And she worked with birds. And I was like, ooh, birds, they're not rats or mice. Like that, I'm already sold. So I went and started working in Michelle's lab, and her lab looked at pair bonding behaviors. So these are zebra finches. They're native to Australia, but they're highly domesticated. Many people have them as pets. You'll see them at PetSmart or something like that. But they're a really interesting model for social behavior. So this is the male with the bright orange cheeks, and you can see some of his zebra print stripes. And these are the females in all gray. And these guys pair up for life. And so they are monogamous, and once they choose their pair partner, they remain with that partner for their whole lives, basically until one of them dies. So this is who they're going to reproduce with. They spend their whole adult lives traveling together, nesting together, and really living their lives together. So making that decision of who is going to be your pair partner is a really big decision in the lives of these birds. And what Michelle's lab studied was how the hormones that are associated with reproduction actually influence the behaviors that birds show to each other when they're courting. So courting is the males trying to impress the female, and the females giving information back to the male about whether she's interested or not. So there's a lot of courtship behaviors that happen in these birds. And again, this is a really big decision that they're making in their bird lives. And so that's what I ended up studying as an undergrad. I was looking at the effect of certain hormones on these courtship behaviors that they were showing while they were forming these pair bonds. And I ended up doing an honors thesis in that lab. I ended up working in that lab for the year after I graduated, just to keep doing research. And so this is me, and this was my friend Danny, who was also in the lab. He also did a project on pair bonding and hormones, and we were really lucky that we were able to combine our two studies, and we actually published it. So we published a paper based on my undergrad honors thesis, and going from like this poor student who had no idea what was going on to someone who not only did a research project, but published it in such a way that like other people can read about it, was a really transformative experience. And something I would have never had even known I could have done. And as part of the undergrad research experience I had, another part of that was actually going to conferences where there's lots of people in this field who are studying similar things, and you're sharing your data, they're sharing your data, you're meeting people who are studying similar things. And so as an undergrad, that's me, I had much shorter hair, it was a different time. And that was like before the Karen cut, okay? But I was at this meeting as an undergrad. So this was 2010. It was quite a long time ago now. I think I was a senior, then. And this is the Society for Behavioral Neuroendocrinology. So this is a whole conference of people who are studying behavior and endocrinology, which are hormones, and neuro in the brain. So it wasn't just this lab that I found. There's this whole conference of people who are studying hormones in the brain and how they affect behavior. So that's Michelle, and these were the other grad students at the time in the lab, and this was the banquet dinner at the end of the conference. And what's not shown in this picture is next to me was sitting my future PhD advisor. So I didn't know at the time. I just randomly sat at this table with my lab, and next to me was Elizabeth, and we got to talking about my research, and I knew who Elizabeth was because I knew all of the papers she had published. Elizabeth is a very well-established woman in the field of behavioral neuroendocrinology and has published many, many influential papers. So she's sort of like celebrity status in this very niche scientific field. And I ended up sitting next to her, having a conversation with her. And eventually I applied to work in her lab as a graduate student. So Elizabeth had been at Cornell. That is where her lab was. I applied to Cornell and I got accepted to the program, and she became my PhD advisor. Cornell is in this beautiful town in upstate New York called Ithaca. It's right on the base of Cayuga Lake. It's very hilly, lots of beautiful waterfalls, really just like picturesque. And I had to pretty much pinch myself every day I was on this campus because I just could not believe that I had sort of gotten to a place like this and was doing this research that I didn't even know was possible until I had come across that undergraduate opportunity in such an odd and some sort of random way. But when I was at Cornell, so Elizabeth also worked with those same zebra finches that Michelle's lab worked with. And because I had been studying their pair bonding behavior and how they choose a mate, well, in my mind, I was like, well, I guess the next step after you choose a mate is you have a family. And so I got really interested in how these birds parent their young and how hormones might be involved in their parental behavior. So I had studied their courtship behavior, and so I kind of wanted to move down the track and see what kinds of effects hormones might have on these parenting behaviors. So this is a newly hatched chick next to some of the other eggs in the nest. And there's our male and female zebra finch. So that's the segue into my research, which I have been pursuing ever since graduate school, and that is on the study of parental behavior. I love parental behavior. I think it's just a fascinating behavior. And one of the things that's so fascinating is that so many different animals do it. and so many animals do it in different ways. So just some examples here. This is a mouth brooding cichlid fish, and these are all of its babies. And so these mouth brooding fish, when there's a predator or some sort of danger in the environment, they actually like slurp up all of their young and keep them in their mouths, and they will swim around with the fry in their mouths until it's safe to let them out. There are other species that do this with their eggs, and they do it for the whole period of the incubation period. So instead of having eggs in a nest, they'll swim around with eggs in their mouth for about 2 weeks, completely foregoing eating or anything else just to protect their young. So there's really interesting, evolved behaviors that animals do in order to protect their young and raise their young. But no matter what parental behavior looks like in your particular species, there's sort of one common goal in mind, and that's to promote your offspring's survival. So to help protect them, to help nourish them, to help make them grow, to help make them survive into adulthood so that they can go on and pass on their genes to the next generation. So when I started studying this topic, and still today, these are the kinds of questions that I'm really curious about. So first of all, like, what makes parents want to take care of their young? There's species differences in how parenting looks like, but you think about humans might be parenting for upwards of 20 years. That's a huge commitment. These fish are foregoing eating so that they can protect their young or their eggs in their mouth. These frogs, for example, lay their eggs on the ground, but the tadpoles have to be in water in order to go under metamorphosis. So the dad, this is the dad frog here, the tadpoles will piggyback on him, and he has to travel many, many kilometers to a water source, which is really dangerous. And this is really energetically consuming, carrying his offspring on his back for so long. So what makes parents want to do these behaviors? And why do we see so many different ways that parental care has evolved over species and over time? And then from sort of a neurobiological or a psychological perspective, if there's such a variety of behaviors and such a variety of organisms that show this behavior, would we expect that the same mechanism, so is it the same hormones, is it the same brain areas, are those same mechanisms controlling parental behavior across species, or is every species a little bit different? And that's really the question that I've been following for a long time. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but I just want to say it now. Feel free to interrupt at any time if you have a question or a comment, or if something doesn't make sense. I welcome interruptions, so don't feel bad about doing that if something comes to mind. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. So I'm interested in how hormones affect and promote parental behaviors. And most of what we know about that comes from animal work. And most of that animal work is done in rodents. And to very briefly summarize years and decades of work, basically what we have found in female rodents is the same hormones that are involved in pregnancy, so the hormones that maintain the uterine environment and allow a fetus to grow. Those same hormones act on the brain to help prepare the brain to be able to show maternal behaviors once she's given birth. And also hormones that are involved in lactation, so hormones that are involved in producing milk and nursing, continue to also act on the brain after birth to maintain behaviors. So in females, a lot of the same hormones that are involved in pregnancy and lactation are also necessary to show the whole suite of maternal behaviors that a female would need to show. So not just nursing, but rats and mice, for example, will pick up their pups if they've strayed too far from the nest to bring them back. They have to huddle over these pups because they have no fur and they can't keep warm, and so they need to sort of keep them in the nest and hover over them. They spend a lot of time licking and grooming the pups to keep them clean. So all these hormones are involved in all of those behaviors, not just sort of like the nursing behaviors. And this field has been very translatable to humans. Humans have all the same hormones as female rodents, and while we can't always do the same level of experiments in humans, a lot of what we've learned in mammals has been able to be translated into humans. I should also mention that not only is this field of research really confined to rodents, but it's really confined to female rodents. And it's one of the few fields in science where males are actually understudied. So we know far less about the neurobiology of paternal care, but we know relatively a fair amount about the neurobiology of maternal care by the mom. So one of the hormones that I got really interested in when I started grad school is this hormone called prolactin. Prolactin is most well known for its role in lactation. That's where the name prolactin came from. So it is highly involved in producing milk. So prolactin is generated in this very tiny gland called the pituitary gland that hangs off the base of the brain. It's very, very tiny. Prolactin is secreted from that gland into the circulatory system, where it can then travel all over the body to do various things. For example, it can act on these mammary glands to help produce milk when a mother is nursing. But prolactin can also travel through the blood and re-enter the brain and can affect various parts of the brain, which then can lead to effects on behavior. So the same hormone that we see that is necessary to produce milk also helps animals show all the other maternal behaviors they have to show in order to keep their infants alive. And again, we know that mostly from rodent studies. But what is interesting is it's not just female mammals that have prolactin. Males have prolactin. And in fact, pretty much all vertebrate species have prolactin. So fish have prolactin, and birds have prolactin, and humans have prolactin. So we know that it's involved in this lactation and this maternal behavior, but we don't know, or at least we didn't know for a long time, why it's in all these other organisms and why it's in males, for example. But what's interesting, and I've sort of already given this away, is that not only do birds have prolactin, but prolactin is really high, and in fact is the highest it will ever be when they're actively taking care of young. So this is just an example of pied flycatchers. You can imagine a sort of nest like this out in your backyard, maybe in a tree, these really helpless young birds that are completely reliant on their parents to come feed them, take care of them, keep them warm. When birds are not breeding, their prolactin levels, so that level that's circulating around in their blood, is really low. And when they start incubating eggs, so that they don't go through pregnancy, but they lay eggs, and both the male and female can incubate. And when they do that, prolactin, starts to slowly rise over the course of incubation. And you see that it really peaks right at this time when the chicks hatch. So we have, people have measured prolactin in lots of different bird species that take care of young like this, and we see this pattern over and over again. Yeah. Yes, so it's in both males and females as long as both males and females take care of young. So if you had a species where the male didn't take care of the young but the female did, we'd only see that in females. Yeah, in the back there. So it varies depending on the project. I can kind of get into that, but the colonies we keep in the lab have 200 to 300 birds, in them. And so I don't use 200 or 300 birds all in my studies, but we have colonies that are really large that we can pick like a subset of like 10 or 20, for example, to use like in a study. Yeah. It gets very loud. They're very chatty birds. Right, so thinking back to prolactin, it's this lactation hormone, it's this maternal hormone. Why do birds have prolactin? Well, it turns out there are a couple of birds that actually have bird lactation. So for example, this is a pigeon, like a pigeon you would just see out in the park or on the sidewalk. So pigeons, ringdoves, and flamingos have evolved this unique capability to actually produce milk that they use to feed their young. So all birds have this crop sac. It's sort of like a digestive organ that sort of hangs off of their throat. It helps digest seeds and the kind of food that they're eating. But in both the males and the females, when they're incubating and that prolactin is starting to slowly rise, that prolactin starts acting on these cells inside the crop, and the cells that line the inside of this organ start secreting a milk in the same way that mammary glands start secreting a milk. And so once the chicks hatch, both the males and females, because both the males and females raise the young in these species, will regurgitate that milk to their young. And this is all prolactin driven, just as it is in mammals. So this is a really unique feature of birds. Obviously, this is not what we think of when we think of typical birds. But pigeons and ringdoves have been really well studied just because this is such a unique phenomenon. People have been really interested in how this evolved and how this all works. And just like the mammals, not only do you need that prolactin to produce this food source, but that high level of prolactin that we see at hatching also seems to be necessary for that brooding behavior, which is keeping chicks warm in the nest, actual chick feeding, so that regurgitation behavior. But also you need it for the crop milk production itself. So it's a little hard to disentangle for both female mammals and these birds. It's just a little hard to disentangle. Well, if you need this hormone to produce the food, but it's also, you need it for these behaviors, it's kind of hard to separate those two things. And so what we really needed to know is, does prolactin have a role in parenting in sort of a non-lactating species? Because so far we only know mostly about the female mammals and these kind of strange lactating birds. So that's what I did my PhD research on, was looking if prolactin had a role in parenting sort of outside of this lactation component. So again, I have the zebra finches that I'm using. These are the males and the females. Just for scale, this is a picture. I was checking a nest one day and a chick was actually hatching like in the moment. So it's like, oh my gosh, I gotta take a picture of that. But just for scale, this is a penny and a dime. They're quite tiny when they hatch. So there's a day 1, day 2, day 3. So as I mentioned, these are socially monogamous birds. They pair up, and importantly for my research, those pairs take care of the young together. So both the males and females are raising the young, and they really are pretty 50-50. I mean, they really share those parental duties very well. And so both the males and females are participating in all these behaviors that are necessary for raising young. So building the nest, incubating the eggs, feeding the chicks, keeping them warm, defending the nest. And importantly, these guys do not produce crop milk. So they don't have any of this weird lactation stuff going on. They eat seeds. They regurgitate those seeds back up to their chicks as food. And so when I was a grad student, one of the first things I did was, let's measure prolactin and just make sure it's following that same trend that we have seen in other birds. And sure enough, in both the males and the females, Prolactin's really low, like before they start breeding. So baseline is they're just sort of in a cage. They're not breeding. They're not doing much. But as soon as the female lays those eggs, prolactin slowly starts to increase. And again, we see the peak right at chick hatching. So it is high throughout post-hatch care, but it starts to decline. As soon as chicks get closer to fledging, which means they can leave the nest, we see that prolactin starts to go back down. So it really seems to be correlated with this time of really intensive parenting. But this is only sort of a relationship. We can't really infer any causal relationship unless we do a proper experiment. So just looking at this graph another way, these are paired birds, incubating birds, and chick raising birds. So what I did was I had a group of birds where I gave them a drug at this time. So when their chicks hatch, I gave them this drug that prevented the secretion of prolactin. So they had very, very low levels, like a non-breeding bird would. And then we have a control group that just receives like a placebo drug, so their prolactin levels don't change. And we wanted to see, well, if we block that increase in prolactin, can you block those behaviors? And just a fun little behind the scenes, there's a lot of DIY stuff that goes on in labs like this. All of their parental behavior goes on in a nest, and so we need a way to observe the nest. And so we didn't have a lot of money in my lab, and I was kind of the only one studying parenting, so we didn't really have a very technical setup here. But I figured maybe if I could have some like translucent nest boxes that would help with the light, and so I could kind of get a better video. And so these are just Tupperware boxes I bought at the dollar store. Cut out a little hole that's attached to the cage, and zebra finches were happy to nest in it. They're like, it's a place, I'll nest in there. So I just cut out this little hole in the back. We had these little modified webcams. I mean, I'm sure like there's way better technology now, but this is what we had at the time. And so I was able to set up this little camera nest box situation so we could record the behavior inside the nest to see what these guys are doing. So just a quick example, this is like what the nest cam looks like. So these are two little chicks in the nest, just hatched. There's a little temperature logger, and this is a female. She comes in, she kind of does that little butt wiggle thing, and this is just her brooding. So it's not that exciting, but she comes into the nest, and we can record how long she's spending sort of sitting on her chicks like this to keep it warm. And both the males and females do this behavior. I'm just showing females here. And then we can look at regurgitation behavior. So this is the chick feeding behavior. So this is now the male. He's getting ready to feed this chick. So the chick's very tiny. It's very hard to see. I've slowed it down, but he's basically regurgitating into the little mouth of that chick. So we can also kind of quantify how much time they're spent feeding their chicks as well. And so basically, if birds are given a drug that prevents that increase in prolactin that they would normally experience, their behaviors basically go away. So these are control placebo birds that are, and this is how long they're spending feeding the chicks, but we measured a couple different behaviors. So we've only watched them for, I think, about 2 hours or so. So they don't feed a ton during that. The feeding bouts are really quickly, but the control parents are doing it. And what I hope you can appreciate here, all these zeros. So when they don't have that high prolactin, they basically just stop taking care of their young. So that tells us that this hormone is really important for just provisioning young in general. And this isn't really specific to lactation. I'm not going to talk about the work today because I kind of wanted to focus on the birds, but I did some postdoc work after this looking at male mice. So it was a mammalian model, and also basically showed that prolactin is necessary for male parental behavior as well. So this really isn't a lactation thing. Males who parent need the same hormone to show their behaviors. These birds who aren't lactating also need this hormone to show these behaviors. So really kind of expanding the definition of what this hormone does, sort of beyond just lactation. Yeah.
So it looks like there's a really big variability in sort of control
Yeah.
parental behavior.
Yeah.
Is that linked to like differences in prolactin concentrations like between individuals?
So I have done that, and overall, if you kind of measure their behaviors, there is some correlation to that. I think in retrospect, I did not standardize this anyway. I just sort of recorded for like an hour during the day, and I think in retrospect, I would have taken the chicks away for like an hour so that the chicks are all the same level of hungry, because I think it is variable, and I think it's just because the time of day was a little bit variable, and so if they had happened to just feed, I'm not really going to see a lot of feeding behavior. And that's sort of a retrospect, like if I could redo the study, that's how I would do it. But also, even if we don't standardize it, like birds are just variable. And that does seem to link on to how much prolactin they have. Yeah.
Done kind of the inhibition of prolactin in every stage or just after the hatching?
I've only so far I've done it in the hatching. But there's been other people in other species that have shown that, not in these kind of birds, but more like chickens and turkeys, who really don't have this post-hatch care because they hatch what we call precocial young, which don't really require intensive care. Like baby chicks can walk on their own as soon as they hatch. So in those species where the incubation is the most important sort of aspect, prolactin's highly required for incubation, like in chickens, for example. Yeah. So I haven't done that, but in other species, they've shown that that's important. Yeah. I'm going to go to the back and then I'll go to the front. Yeah.
Me?
Yep. I can't remember. I just saw a hand in the back.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to give a comment of,
Sure.
of when my mom got pregnant with her first child, and this was in Mexico, central Mexico, and she told me like I couldn't produce milk, and she also didn't mention that she was 14 years old.
Yeah.
So at the time, she couldn't produce as much
Yeah.
milk as she wanted to
Yeah.
for a child. So what her mom did, or what my grandma did, is that she would actually give her this it's basically Mexican moonshine equivalent. It's called pulque, and supposedly it's supposed to help uh newly uh newly moms
Yeah.
to produce milk. But also she was also being attended by her of like getting massages, a lot of protein in her diet. And yeah, my two oldest brothers are like they're fittest as a fiddle and they never get sick, and I was
Yeah.
that's a different story with me.
Yeah. So I don't know quite how that what exactly is in the moonshine, but there's a lot of factors besides prolactin that affect lactation. So this is a big one, but I can certainly see that like maybe addressing some other factors could have helped with that. Yeah. You have a question in the front? Yeah.
Apologies if you
Oh yeah.
missed it. All visual observation, or was it?
Yeah, so basically we have these videos of behavior, and we oftentimes have researchers in the lab who will then score these videos. So we have different programs like software we can use where you can count how many times an animal has done something. You can record when a behavior starts and when a behavior stops. And so they're all manually coded from videos. So they're not live in the moment. We take videos and then watch the videos later and record how much behavior we see.
Do you conduct any scans like fMRI or IEG?
Oh, yeah. You can do that in zebra finches. I personally do not.
Okay.
But you can do kind of fMRI or MRI. The birds have to be anesthetized, though, because you have to stay still in those conditions. And so you can't really get real-time behavioral data. But if I have time, I can show you that we have other ways to record brain activity in the birds that are awake.
You're observing behaviors,
Yep.
not necessarily observing the movement of neurochemicals. Okay.
Yeah, just behavior. Yep. Yep. And hormones at this point. Yeah. And then in the back there. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, so zebra finches are kind of unique. A lot of times when baby birds fledge, which means that they can leave the nest, oftentimes that's when parenting stops and they go off on their own. But zebra finches actually have this sort of like second period of parental care. So they have the period when the chicks are in the nest, and obviously the parents are coming to the nest to take care of them. They have this sort of second phase of parenting where the chicks can leave the nest, they can fly, and they spend all day sort of outside the nest, but they come back to their parents just for feeding. And so there's sort of this like 2-week period after they leave where they're still coming back to their parents, but slowly that starts to drop off and they become more independent. And then once they've hit sexual maturity, then oftentimes they'll either go off in pair or they might travel to like a different flock and kind of disperse. So it's a little bit of both, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so what was really interesting to me was before even studying the behaviors of their parental behaviors
Yeah.
was how the zebra finches choose their partners.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they just stick with one
Yep.
that they choose right away.
Yep.
And it was just like immediately connecting that to humans.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering if in your studies you found any like correlation with that, and if it's something that we're missing and they have, or
Yeah. So you bring up a good point that, and the point is, in order to really understand that phenomenon, we need to step back and think a little bit more beyond just their hormones and their brains. So I briefly mentioned that these guys are native to Australia, and they are native to the desert, like outback of Australia. So I don't know if anyone has been there, but it's a desert. It is dry. And so rainfall is really sporadic. And birds here, like we would see in Michigan, are often seasonal breeders. And they breed in the spring because that's when all the food comes up, right? All these grasses are growing and flowers are blooming and seeds are abundant. That's why birds breed here in the seasonal, because there's predictive times of the year where there's more food. In the desert, that is not predictive. The rainfall is random. There is no seasonality in the desert. And so, unlike birds here, they don't have a seasonal rhythm of breeding. They basically breed whenever it rains. And so you need to be able to breed very quickly and when the time comes, which you can't predict. And so if you had to go through that whole process of finding a pair and going through the courtship, and like that takes days and weeks to do. If you're monogamous and you have picked that pair partner and you're constantly traveling around, that one moment when it rains and that's your moment to breed, they're like ready to go. And so if you think about it in sort of the bigger context, it makes a little bit more sense about why they're so monogamous and why they have this really strong pair bond. It's to ensure that they're able to breed at any unpredictable moment. As far as humans, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the way humans evolved, maybe, we also, I don't, you might need to talk to an anthropologist to be honest, but yeah, there's probably other environmental and social pressures that humans have undergone that has led to like our sort of monogamous mating system. Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
Thank you. Does the level of prolactin stop like nest building or something like that along these birds? Because nests are more often than not for their children more
Yeah.
than anything else, even more for them,
Yeah.
the children than themselves. So I wanted to know if prolactin and the inhibition of
Yeah.
prolactin kind of inhibits also the instinct to build a nest and all these things.
Yeah. I haven't found that, and I don't think there are other studies that have shown prolactin, but there are other hormones that are not prolactin that seem to be involved in it. So it kind of seems like the different stages of parenting are regulated by different hormones. So like incubation is more regulated by estrogen and progesterone. There's a couple other, there's a hormone that is VIP, it's an acronym for a really long name, that seems to be involved in nest building. So there's different hormones that sort of promote different stages of breeding, and prolactin really seems to promote the stage of chick care, but not the other stages. Yeah. So just sort of different mechanisms along the way. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for all your questions. That was awesome. I just see the time. Okay. Let me just think, because I definitely have more, and I need to be a little choosy about what I show. So I think I'm going to quickly show this. So I've been talking a lot about the hormonal changes that happen, and just to take another step back, it's one thing to kind of measure the amount of hormones that are circulating around the body, but in order for a hormone to actually have an effect, it has to bind to a receptor. So every hormone has its own specific receptor, and only that hormone can activate that receptor. So we think of it as sort of a lock and key. You have to have the right lock and the right key in order for something to happen. So there's lots of things that can happen when hormones bind to the receptors, but if we're thinking about the brain, it's usually changing something about the neuron in that brain. So maybe it's telling it to fire, maybe it's telling it to silence, maybe it's changing something about the gene expression. There's a lot of different things that hormones can do, but the key concept is that in order for a hormone to do anything, it has to bind to its receptor. And so when we think about hormones entering the brain, we want to know where the receptors are in the brain, because that can tell us where it can have an effect. And so that is something else that I did as a graduate student. So if you think about looking at a bird sort of face on, this is a coronal section of the brain. And so what I did was I collected brains from several zebra finches, and we slice them into really thin sections, these coronal sections, and we can use a technique that sort of stains for where the expression of these prolactin receptors are, so that we can see where in the brain prolactin can have an effect. And so I don't expect you to know what these brain regions are, but I just sort of want to highlight that there's a lot of different places in the brain that has prolactin receptors. So there's this area called the medial preoptic area, or the MPOA, that's known to regulate parental behavior in lots of other species, like mammals. So we see prolactin receptors there. We see prolactin receptors in this region of the brain that we know controls regurgitation feedings. And we also see prolactin receptors in areas of the brain that we know are involved in like motivated or when a behavior is rewarding. And so we see prolactin receptors can act in all these different sort of areas of the brain, meaning that they could affect a lot of different things about the behavior itself. And one of the really weird, odd things that I came across when I was doing the study is like, okay, I kind of expected it to be in these brain regions that we know regulate parental behavior, but what I didn't expect is that I found them in a lot of brain regions that regulate sensory processing. So like I said, you don't need to know what these brain regions are, but I found a bunch of them that are involved in visual processing and also auditory processing. So these different regions of the brain that really process incoming auditory information and visual stimuli. And when I was a grad student, I had no idea what to make of this. Like, why would this lactation parental hormone be in these visual and auditory regions of the brain? But as time has gone on, it's really started making me think about, well, I wonder if this hormone actually affects the way that parents perceive sensory information, particularly from their young. And so that is more of the research question that I'm looking at now, is actually how does sensory processing change when you become a parent, and do hormones basically affect the way that you interpret the sensory stimuli around you? So I've been talking a lot about how hormones have been affecting parental behavior in the last study, but really what's in between those two is something has to change in the brain. So we have these hormones that are acting on the brain. Something about that brain activity has to change in order to get a change in the behavior. We also know from lots of different studies, from lots of different animals, that your environment, anything that's going on in your environment, any kind of stimuli that you come across can also affect your brain activity. And so when we start thinking about new parents who all of a sudden have a new infant in their environment, these infants are providing a lot of new sensory stimuli to those parents that can start actually altering their brain activity in conjunction with hormones. And what do I mean by sensory stimuli? Well, anything that you can sense with your 5 senses. So if we're thinking about infants or young, there are certain smells that are associated with newborns. So if you've ever talked to a new parent or have been a new parent yourself, oftentimes they really love this new baby smell. New parents rate the odor of their babies as really highly attractive, and like they just love it. Like they just love smelling their babies. And we see this in lots of other animals. So rodents really are in tune with the olfactory or those smell cues that come from their pups. For example, there's visual stimuli, so what we call baby schema, if you've ever come across this in like a developmental psych class. It's basically all the features that we attribute to something that is cute. So these big eyes and these round heads, these little noses. You can even hear in my voice that it already changes because it elicits this response. It's emotional response that these features actually elicit from people. And it's not just babies. We see these in other young animals too, have these same kind of features that elicit these reactions from us. And of course, there's auditory, right? We all have heard babies crying. We know that's a super salient stimulus for parents. And other animals have different whines and cries and auditory cues that they also make to grab the attention of their parents. And so what I really want to know is, these are features that babies have all the time, but is there something that happens in the brains of parents where they become particularly sort of interested in these stimuli? And so that's what I have been studying now, is I'm really focusing on what the role of these sort of auditory cues are in promoting parental behaviors. And if you remember from this slide, there's prolactin receptors in auditory processing regions. So I really want to know is if one of the changes that hormones do is it changing the way that parents perceive sound, particularly the sound of infants. So that is sort of the research that I am getting into now. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to quickly give you just a sort of preview of how that happens. But I will just quickly show you that, so this is a zebra finch chick. So this is a day 6-old chick. And just to orient you, because I know it looks kind of freaky, this is its mouth that's open. These are its 2 eyes, so they're not open yet, they're closed. And then this is its little wing and its little foot. And so we're looking at this chick kind of looking up at us. And so this is sort of what the parents might see if they jump into their nest. And unlike crying, zebra finches have more of a begging call that they use when they're hungry. So this is what a begging call sounds like. Oh, that's not very loud. Well, hopefully you can hear it a little bit. So that's my fake beak that I'm using to kind of try to pretend like I'm feeding the chick. So if it thinks that it's going to be fed, it starts doing these displays that I know is really faint, but it has this sort of begging call that the parents use. And it also has these little dot patterns in their mouth. I don't know if you can kind of tell in the video, but it seems like the parents are also paying attention to these visual cues. So I really want to know how parents are sort of changing their sensory processing of these types of cues to help direct their behavior. And I'm just going to skip ahead like many slides because I don't want to go over. But I do want to show you some fun things that we are doing. So I know I got the question about doing kind of MRI recordings. So we don't do MRI recordings, but what we do are what we call electrophysiological recordings. Yes, in vivo. Yep. And so basically what this is this, so when neurons are active, they send electrical pulses to each other. And so what we do is we have tiny wires. I mean, they're like a hair. Barely see them. You can implant these, what we call microdrives, into the brains of the birds. So those little wires can actually sit in those auditory regions. And it's a surgery that the birds undergo, but after that they're awake and they're flying around and they basically have this sort of electronic hat stuck to them, but otherwise they behave normally, they act normally. But what this allows us to do is actually measure brain activity in an awake and behaving bird. And so we essentially have a little wire that gets plugged into this and that gets hooked up to a computer, and we can actually get real-time brain activity readouts when birds are either like doing a certain behavior, or in this case, we can play them different stimuli such as a chick begging call or an adult call or an adult sound or a pure tone. So we can play them different auditory stimuli and actually measure their brain activity in real time, how those brains are responding to sounds. And so this is a big graph with a lot going on, but I'll walk you through it. So this was a study we did with birds, and we're recording from an auditory region in the brain, listening to a pure tone. So that's just a sort of a beep. It's nothing really interesting. This is an adult male song, and then I had parents listening to one of their own chick calls and then a chick call that they've never heard before. So none of the birds really respond to that tone. It's not a very interesting stimulus, but what I want to show you here, this yellow is the novel chick in a non-parenting female. They don't have a very big neural response to that, but as soon as they become parents, they start responding a lot more to those chick sounds. And interestingly, it doesn't seem to matter if it's a novel or their own chick, but in general, they're much more responsive to chick sounds when they're parenting versus non-parenting. In the males, they are responding to they're responding to chicks more. You can see these yellow bars, but they're actually responding to everything more. So they're even responding to tone more. They're responding to the adults more. They're responding to both the novel and chicks more. So we're kind of, for the first time, seeing sort of a sex difference here where both parents are responding more to chicks. But it seems like the females are just increasing their response to begging calls, whereas the males are increasing their response to everything. And so this is something that we're going to follow up with and see if hormones that are like prolactin, for example, are actually affecting the way that these neurons are responding to chick calls. So that's sort of like where the lab is going, and that is some of the research that I'm going to be getting into at Michigan. And just because this was a more undergraduate focused talk, I just want to give some examples of what an undergrad might do in a lab like mine that does sort of this behavior research and this hormone research and also this sensory research. And so one of them is watching behavior. So we have undergrads who work in the lab either as volunteers, or sometimes they do it for credit, or sometimes there's certain situations where they can actually be funded and it's like a job. And they would get paid like a stipend or a salary. So we do a lot of watching behavior. Sometimes we watch them live. Sometimes we do those video recordings, and then we'll use these software programs to kind of score the videos from there. We do a lot of histology, which is working with brain tissues. So this is an example of a brain. It's frozen in this machine called a cryostat, and we use this cryostat to thinly section brains so that we can put them on microscope slides and look at them under the microscope. We do different techniques to stain the cell, so it's really hard to just see a neuron or a cell under the microscope, but there's different techniques you can use to actually stain cells for different proteins or whatever you're interested in, and change them colors so that when you do look at them under a microscope, you can image them, and then you can use different techniques to count them or see like the expression levels in the cells. So there's different ways to analyze brain tissue, and we do a lot of that in my lab. One way, we also measure a lot of hormones, and so the main way we do that is through blood samples. So we'll collect a small blood sample from the birds, and we'll run techniques called hormone assays, which are ways to actually measure the amount of hormone in the blood. So that's something that undergrads are involved in. And then the last thing is we don't just do research, we also take care of our birds. And so we give them fresh food every week, we check their nests, we give them water baths. We really play a big role in the husbandry of taking care of these guys. And honestly, it's one of my favorite parts of the job. And so we have a lot of helpers in the lab just kind of coming in to like help take care of the birds themselves. So I know it was a little quick at the end there. I'm happy to go into more depth about any of that. I don't want to go like super over time. But I do just want to send a few thank yous. I should have put my undergrad mentors on here because that's really where the journey started, was all the way back in undergrad. But that's my PhD advisor, and that's one of my postdoc advisors. There was many other people who worked in all of these labs who were super supportive and helped me along this journey and learn all of these techniques and learn how to become a scientist. There's been many birds I've worked with over the years that I'm really grateful for. Lots of funding agencies that have provided funds to allow us to have the lab run and to conduct these experiments. And then I just want to thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time to come out and listen. And thank you again for the invite. And this is where I work in psychology. I'm also affiliated with the Neuroscience Institute at Michigan. So thanks for coming out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smiley. That was very interesting. So I would say let's do this. Some of you need to come sign in a few minutes at the end of the talk, but we have just a few minutes. If anyone has a last question or two, we could do that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Awesome.
I'm a bird lover.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, where are birds like your favorite animal, if you had to say?
Like not
one?
really, to be honest.
Yeah, it's just
and I mean, in undergrad, it was more about like having to handle them and work with them in the lab. I found them just much more like interesting and easier to handle. And then over time, I have really grown to love them. So I think now, yes. But I think when I started, I was like pretty neutral. I was just happy it wasn't a rat. But now I love birds. And yes, I love learning about all birds. Yeah. Yeah.
Was there any part of like psychology or neuroscience that you were like scared of, if that makes any sense? Like, I'm very interested in the brain,
Yeah.
but for neuroscience, there's a lot of chemistry, and
Yes.
I despise chemistry. Is there anything like anything you did to sort of overcome any fears that you might have had for specifics in
Yeah.
the
Because yeah, I
study?
totally vibe with that. I totally feel that. And I think a lot of psychology majors are bachelors of arts, which don't really have a lot of science courses or neuroscience courses. And so oftentimes going into a neuroscience field can feel really intimidating because that's not exactly the background that you get. And so for me, I was opposite. I liked chemistry. For whatever reason, I hated biology. I just thought it was the worst. And when I got to grad school, I realized I needed to understand biology in order to understand a lot of what was going on. And so I literally got like a biology textbook and checked it out of the library and just sort of had to play some catch up. And I think for me, what changed it for me is I didn't really like sitting in a class learning about biology, but when I knew that I could apply biology to something I was interested in, it made it like a little less bad. Like it made it like, okay, I want to learn this because I'm actually interested in this behavior and I want to see how that changes or what's controlling it. And so I think it just sort of changed my focus. And the irony now is now I would say I'm a biologist, even though that was like my least favorite subject. But just to also comment that, yeah, it takes a lot of bravery and it's really hard. There's a lot of steep learning curves to learn the techniques in the lab, to learn the literature, to learn the conceptual background. And so I think one of the hardest things, but one of the benefits of going to graduate school, for example, is you develop a really thick skin because you kind of have to learn to be tough because it is hard. And I think just, yeah, finding this, whatever support you can from your students or your family or your friends can just help you get through it. But the reward at the end is so great that it kind of makes the journey worth it. Yeah. Yeah.
My question was, in all your research you have done with the birds and probably other animals and everything, what would you say was the most difficult part?
That's a good question. There's a lot of different difficult parts. I think, kind of going back to the thick skin, this is like the final product that I'm showing, the fancy, beautiful final product. But this was years and years of work, and it's years of trial and error, and things not working, and things breaking, and things not going their way. And so it's really hard to sometimes face that. You know, when you're trying to get something to work and it's just not working, that can be really frustrating. And so you kind of develop this like perseverance of like, all right, I need to just like step back, think about what I can do, what can I change, who can I talk to. And so I think it is a challenging part, but it makes you, I kind of say at PhD, you become a professional problem solver. Like you kind of just learn how to figure things out. And that's really what it comes down to. And now I would say that that was a big almost fear or a difficult part was like, I just can't figure this out. How am I ever going to figure this out? And now I sort of embrace that. Like, all right, we're going to try this new research project. And I know I don't really know how to do it, but like, I know I can figure it out. And so, yeah, I think that's probably challenging, but also like, it's a really good skill to learn. Yeah. Yeah.
One more quick question. Were there any like same-sex like partnerships in the research? And if there were, was the prolactin like affected differently with them?
Yeah, so I haven't studied that with parenting, but when I was doing the pair bonding stuff, we do see sometimes there are same-sex pairing that happens in zebra finches. So I know it happens. We have recorded it. Not a lot of people have studied it, and I haven't really studied that. Just anecdotally, I will say one time I had a nest and there was a male and a female, but also another male. And the three of them seemed to be in the nest all together. And I can't say anything more about why or what they were up to, but I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, so I don't know is the answer. And unfortunately, it's an area that isn't super well studied, but we should study it. Yeah.
Well, could we give one more round of applause, please? Thank you so much.
Yay. Mm-hmm.